Hello, my name is Wilson Smart, and this is my oral exam for SB 7210E. Here are the two course objectives I'm going to focus on first. Um, I'm going to go deep dive into number one and then deep dive into number two. So let's start with number one here. So, number one, analyze the influence of culturally unresponsive environments on the psychological, social, and emotional development of culturally diverse students and gifted populations. So I wanted to focus specifically on gifted underachievers from low SES backgrounds. I think that there's not nearly enough support in place to retain them in gifted programming because even if they can get the IQ score, they can get the reading score, they can get the creativity score to allow them to be identified for gifted programming. Oftentimes, students who don't have financial security have lower self-regulation skills and lower work completion skills, so they have a hard time keeping up with the workload in a gifted classroom. So, something that I think I wanted to focus on a lot in my two position papers were what kind of interventions can we put in place to help support those kids. So I started from thinking from a teacher perspective. And even though it's not particularly creative, I think the most effective thing I could think of was having a consistent after school day where I'm meeting with students who are not completing their work and helping hold them accountable to complete work. So this is something that I was a gifted underachiever myself, and I didn't need tutoring so much as I needed accountability. So, but because I came from a high SES background, or at least not a low SES background, I had a lot of support in place with my family or with tutors that I didn't necessarily get left behind. Whereas someone from a low SES background, they might need a teacher to meet with them after school and provide that accountability and make sure that they're getting stuff done before they leave the classroom. Like you cannot get up and leave until you have that essay finished. And if they get stuck with something, you can give them a little bit of support. But the main point is just having someone be accountable, or help the student be accountable. Then in my second position paper went on to expound on this idea and talk about how counseling could be very helpful and sort of helping the student reflect on what is keeping them, what's hurting their motivation, what's hurting them from being self-regulating, what's keeping them from being self-regulating. And the articles from Plucker specifically talked about how gifted students are much more likely to be depressed. And I think from a low SES background, the odds of that happening are even higher. So making sure students are meeting with counselors, which is not normally what's happening in gifted populations, at least in the schools that I've worked in. And finally, using Grantham and Fraser's research, just keeping parents updated, especially if I was going to be doing after school work with students. I think making sure that their parents are involved and keeping them updated, letting them know how much potential the student has, and and what some of the problems are in terms of work completion and keeping up with the workload. If you keep the counselor and you keep the parents and the teacher all working together to support that student, it might be a little bit more culturally responsive and helping students, m- um, helping retain gifted underachievers from low SES backgrounds. The second standard I wanted to focus on is examine programs and policies through a multicultural framework. And I really appreciated Sapon Shivan or Shevan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And how she looked at gifted programming in a way that really aligns with what I've been thinking this past year as we've been taking these classes. And that giftedness is very much a social construct, and it's a social construct that favors white and Asian students at a much higher rate than Black and Hispanic students. So, what I wanted to focus on is how can I come up with ways to change the framework, the curricular framework that in my class that gives students opportunities to show how intelligent they are and that maybe breaks outside of the norms that privileges certain people's perspectives. So I have here a rubric from one of my performance assessments that I like to do with students that um, has them analyze a story and then try to replicate that story. And it's very interesting because in most ELA assessments, you can pretty much guarantee or pretty much predict how students are going to perform on it based on their reading level. But this particular assessment, um, almost students with high reading levels always do pretty well on it, but they do not necessarily pick up on some of the same nuances that other students do who maybe have lower reading levels but are more engaged in the story and can express themselves a little bit more creatively and mimic an author's style a little bit more fluently. And so, what I think I really want to focus on is just creating assessments and creating assignments that allow students to still work on skills like typing, using dialogue, using paragraphs, things like that, but also allow them to show where their intelligence might shine in a way that it wouldn't normally using conventional assignments. Next, future plans. So this is my first year in Atlanta at a new high school. So it'll be my first time teaching high school, um, and first time in Atlanta. So something that I want to do to get to know my students a little bit more is have an after school genius hour, and I want to start by recruiting the gifted students who are on my roster and inviting them to sort of pursue their passions for about an hour a week after school. This is something that is um this is a program that a lot of teachers I've seen are into on the internet where you give 20% of your class time towards letting students focus on their passion. That's definitely not something I can do. I don't know if I have the classroom management or planning skills to do that during class for an entire class. But if I did it on a focused group, like the six gifted students who are in my class, then I think that that could be super helpful and a way of me supporting students in a way that allows them to really show how smart they are outside of the normal ways that school works. And in order to get them after school, I'm going to have a lot of communication with parents. So this will be a really good way of me keeping parents informed on students' progress and some of the benefits or things that their students are entitled to as gifted students in Atlanta Public Schools. And if this was eventually successful, ideally, I would like to do a peer mentoring program where one older student would be helping a younger student with their Genius Hour project. So, after one student has a successful project, he then can be a mentor towards somebody else and help that student along and pursue that student's passion. So I think that students usually listen to each other a lot more than they listen to teachers and adults. So if I could ever have a peer mentoring program where older gifted students were helping younger gifted students, I think that could be really successful. Finally, in terms of network and collaboration, I'm pretty much starting from the bottom. I don't really know anybody in Atlanta. So first, I want to meet with the ELA team. When I met with my instructional coach, she did not seem to have a whole lot of information on gifted programming at my school. But in fairness to her, our school is dealing with a lot right now. We had the worst attendance in APS last year, and the average median income of families is $24,000. So it doesn't surprise me that gifted programming is kind of swept under the rug a little bit as we try to intervene in more immediate pressing matters. But I want to meet with the ELA team and start seeing what are the teachers doing? How are they identifying students? How are we using tabs? How often are teachers asked to recommend students? And I want to start with the ELA team, then eventually reach out to my LEA and gifted program coordinator and my school counselor. So again, if my counselors have time, which is always a problem, but if they do have time, I think it's imperative that my gifted students are meeting with counselors, working through if they're doing well, working through goals, working through just basic self-efficacy things, And if they are struggling, maybe reflecting on why it is that they're struggling and maybe working through some of those emotions as well. And finally, I want to reach out to parents and community partners. Like I said, with my future plans, I would love to do an after school program with gifted students. And that's going to necessarily involve parents. And hopefully, if I get enough traction, there can be community partners and sponsorships as well as the after school program grows. So those are my goals for networking and collaboration, and that'll about do it for my oral exam. Thanks, guys.